So today is January 6th, so basically liberal Christmas. And despite the havoc Democrats and the people, illegal and American, they've enabled have wreaked on America, Democrats still want you to fixate on January 6th. And leading the charge is, no shocker here, Nancy Pelosi, who is not only still obsessed with J6, but is now also blaming Donald Trump, who has had not one but two assassination attempts made on his life, for the rhetoric that led to her husband being hit with the hammer in their San Francisco home.
Now, it didn't end that day. As you know, he called out to these people to continue their violence. My husband being a victim of all of that. And he still has injuries from that attack. So it just goes on and on. It isn't something that happens and then it's over. No, once you are attacked, you have consequences that continue. So it's really a strange person who's going to be president of the United States who thinks that it's okay to pardon people who are engaged in an attack.
So what happened to Paul Pelosi is horrible, but to pin that one on Trump is quite a stretch even for Nancy Pelosi. And look, January 6th was a very bad day 4 years ago. No argument there. But the country has moved on. Democrats didn't get the memo, though. After 4 years under the Democrat thumb, most Americans do not have the luxury of whining about January 6th. We have much bigger problems, and Democrats, not Trump, caused them. But Democrats cannot look in the mirror, and they still think you think it's 2021 and not 2025. They want you to conveniently pass over the millions of illegals they've let invade your community, the inflation they told you was transitory but never left, the crime and thuggery on your city sidewalks. And for those unlucky enough to use public transportation, the daily violent or disgusting things you must endure on the city bus or subway system. Oh, and now also the radical Islamic homegrown terrorism that's flared up in recent weeks. Democrats lost the White House, the popular vote, both houses of Congress, and of course, they've also lost their ever-loving minds. They still think they lost because you didn't appreciate all they've done for you.
So we did a lot of good things, but all too often, Kristen, we talked about the mechanics of the legislation and the details of the legislation, and we really didn't show the kind of empathy and concern to average, or show enough of it to average working families who didn't realize how much we had done and how much we care for them.
We just didn't realize it. We've all been too blind to see the hellhole shape you've put our country in. Well, I'll tell you one thing we sure as hell were not too blind to see. The steep and obvious decline of Joe Biden. They saw it too. They just lied. Right, Chuck?
I want to play you a little bit of something you said last year. Take a look.
I talk to President Biden, regularly. Sometimes several times in a week, or usually several times in a week. His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong.
Leader Schumer, what do you say to Americans who feel as though you and other top Democrats misled them about President Biden's mental acuity?
No. Look, we didn't. And let's look at President Biden. He's had an amazing record. The legislation we passed, one of the most significant groups of legislation since since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, putting in 235 judges, a record, and he's a patriot. He's a great guy. And when he stepped down, he did it on his own because he thought it was better not only for the Democratic Party, for America. We should all salute him. We should all salute him.
Do you feel, as we have this conversation today, that President Biden could serve another 4 years had he stayed in the race and potentially won?
Well, I'm not going to speculate. As I said, I think his record is a stellar one, and he'll go down in history as a really outstanding president.
He'll go down in history, all right. But Chuck Schumer is a liar. So is Kamala. So is Karine Jean-Pierre. All of them. But I do love how Kristen Welker there is absolving herself of any blame. Where has she been the last 4 years? Now, because Democrats lost and Joe is about to be put out to pasture, she suddenly becomes this tough Billy badass trying to drill down on the truth. Oh, please spare me. Joining me now is Rob Bluey, the Daily Signal president and executive editor. All right, Rob, we got a lot to talk about today. If you flipped over to CNN or MSNBC, I'm sure that the tributes are pouring in on January 6th because, of course, this is their most important day of the year. Also a bittersweet one, though, especially for Kamala, who has to preside over the certification of Donald Trump becoming our 47th president, the man that she lost to on the anniversary of January 6th. I mean, it's really poetic justice here. But how do you think Democrats are coping with such a difficult day?
Well, Tommy, it's good to see you. And you're absolutely right. I think these Democrats are living in a completely different world, devoid of reality, because that is exactly what they do. They have a bubble of news media that they consume, and they think that there was one version of events that took place on January 6th, which is completely counter to what we have seen since the evidence has come out, thanks to Republicans who've taken control of the House and released some of the video footage. The Democrats refused to as part of the January 6th committee. And so I think that it probably is, to your point about Kamala Harris, a tough day for her. Yeah, she didn't seem to be enjoying Friday at the swearing in of the new senators all that much. And I think today she probably will have some regrets that she didn't do things differently in her presidential campaign. There were numerous opportunities for her to distance herself from Joe Biden. I mean, I can't even believe Chuck Schumer is still peddling the lie that Joe Biden has these historic accomplishments. The historic accomplishments of Joe Biden are driving up the price of goods so much that the American people threw him out of office.
Yeah, well, I think that Kamala is a little salty that she just has to be doing work. I'll be honest with you. I think she'd much rather be on vacation. I don't think that work ethic is necessarily her thing. But, speaking of January 6th, obviously, I said it on January 6th, 2021. It was a horrible day. I think that there is some nefarious activity going on that we're never going to get to the bottom of, even with Republicans holding both houses in the White House. I think there's things that we're just never going to be able to confirm, and that's really unfortunate. But it was a bad day, regardless. I mean, it just was a horrible day, and there were certainly actions by Trump supporters that I don't agree with, and it was a bad day, right? But there were a lot of people that were just at the Capitol listening to Trump that day, that were just at the Capitol, just trying to express themselves in a non-violent and also patriotic fashion, that are still being swept up in all of this. And so the question is, and I think that Donald Trump even alluded to it today, but talking about the pardons for those, especially those that were not violent on that day, that were simply there that day. Do you think that that's something that he should do, or do you think that he should just distance himself from January 6th altogether and get to other matters that he has on his soon-to-be desk?
Well, Tommy, I think he can do both. I think, first of all, he can follow through on the promise that he made to the American people, that those who were acting nonviolently and maybe were swept up and found themselves in the U.S. Capitol that day, but did not commit any violence, or there's no footage of them doing anything disruptive. Those people have been charged by federal authorities, and I think Donald Trump will probably either grant them clemency or a pardon, and again follow through on that. But I do think that Donald Trump wants to move on from this day. I mean, you heard J.D. Vance talk about that in the vice presidential debate. That this administration is going to be focused on the future, not the past. It's the Democrats who can't stop talking about it. I mean, Liz Cheney, again, awarded by Joe Biden just last week in part for her service on the January 6th committee. So they will do everything they can to try to hang this over the head of Donald Trump. And I don't think it's going to be successful. I think the American people are ready to move on. I think they've had enough of this. Of course, 4 years later, you and I are talking about this for good reason. I mean, it's a historic day in our country's history. The Constitution sets out that January 6th is the day that we certify the Electoral College vote. But we should also remember, Tommy, that it was Democrats who in 2005 objected to George W. Bush's reelection and tried to mount a challenge to him. It was in 2017 the Democrats did the same for Donald Trump. And so it's not just Republicans who have raised questions, it's the Democrats who have actually done this too.
Yeah, and I would also just say, for those that are still crying about January 6th, I mean, you have to be pretty privileged in America right now to cry about January 6th, because things have gotten so bad in terms of the border, in terms of the economy, in terms of the fact that we now have wars that we're involved in on multiple fronts around the world. I mean, to sit there and cry about January 6th 4 years ago. And you know what? I'm going to tell you this. This is my theory in wrapping up the January 6th discussion, because we've got bigger things to talk about. But my theory is that Democrats not only want to talk about January 6th because it looks bad on Donald Trump, I think that they are able to point to one day and go, look, there are Trump supporters acting badly. They are so used to Democrats and liberals and leftists and activists acting badly every other day of the year for many, many years, for decades, that it's like, look at this one day. And then they want you to ignore the entire summer of 2020 where they rioted and looted on behalf of George Floyd. They want you to overlook the fact that just weeks ago, and in fact, last week, in the wake of a terror attack, they had their people, presumably their people, they're not our people, marching in the streets of New York City calling for a global intifada. I mean, we had one bad day. When I say we, I mean Trump supporters, if in fact it really was Trump supporters. One bad day, which was a horrible day. But they can point to that one day and then just ignore everything that they have done and will continue to do. But moving on from that.
They absolutely do. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why the American people have, number one, rejected them, because they don't trust them. They've lost the trust of the American people, not only when it comes to implementing a policy agenda that's beneficial for you and me and everyday Americans, but also because they know that through the media outlets and others sources where they're peddling this information, it's just not a reality of what happened. And so often the other news is just swept under the rug or completely ignored. I mean, you brought up the example of the riots in 2020. And oftentimes, this is what Trump supporters say. Why were the individuals who committed those crimes, sometimes much more violent and destructive to property, not held to the same account as those who were swept up in the FBI raids of January 6th? And so, valid questions. And I think that it's another reason why, when it comes to this new administration, I'm excited about people like Kash Patel, who is President Trump's nominee to lead the FBI, and Pam Bondi to be the Attorney General. I think that they have a big task ahead of them in terms of cleaning up the weaponization that's taken place in some of these law enforcement agencies. But it needs to happen. It needs to happen starting on day one. And that's one of the reasons why I think the U.S. Senate has no time to waste when it comes to confirmation hearings. They need to get started on that this week. Donald Trump needs his team in place as soon after January 20th as possible.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's still much more damage that Joe can inflict on his way out. Some of it is kind of just the pomp and circumstance that just gets under our skin and enrages us a little bit. It doesn't really have necessarily consequences for our daily lives. But I'll tell you somebody who has had consequences on our daily lives, somebody that he chose to award with the highest citizen achievement, which is the Presidential Medal of Freedom, to, I mean, Hillary Clinton. That's just, she probably did that herself, I'll be honest. I think that Joe's not really in charge, and Hillary was probably standing over him like, you're going to give me a medal. And that wouldn't surprise me at all if all of these picks were picked by Hillary and others. But George Soros, right? He's not there. His son accepted it on his behalf. We know that there was a parade of Democrats that went to his beautiful palatial condo in New York City and stood with Alex Soros ahead of the election. We know that they love George Soros. They love the fact that George Soros supports activist DAs and activist causes that have led to a crime crisis in America. But, you know, when you see him issuing these, by any standard, I feel like he's just gone full send, full scorched earth, and he just wants to do what he wants to do, and he doesn't even care if it looks bad on his party. But, you know, what do you think these medals say about the legacy of Joe Biden, and how will history remember him?
Well, Tommy, it's kind of like the pardon of Hunter Biden. I think you're absolutely right. He doesn't care anymore. He's going to do whatever he wants on these final days, realizing that his window is limited to basically honor his friends and those who have supported him politically. The fact that George Soros was one of these recipients is quite frankly disturbing. If you look at the damage that George Soros has inflicted on the American people through the rogue prosecutor movement in this country, installing people into the district attorney's offices in cities all across this country who took a soft on crime approach. And think about the consequences of Americans who are now either without a loved one because of some criminal who was able to escape a punishment, or, you know, are suffering the consequences, long-term mental and physical consequences of crimes committed against them. We have George Soros to blame for all of that. He is the one who bankrolled that effort. And he's also the one who's bankrolled so many liberal causes. So I am not surprised that Joe Biden did this. Obviously, he's a huge donor, as is Tim Gill, who has bankrolled a lot of LGBT causes in this country, and you know, help bring us all sorts of changes in our law through the courts. And so, yes, these are the types of people that Joe Biden is rewarding, along with Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson and others who received awards last week. And it's not just these ceremonial awards. I mean, Joe Biden today took action when it came to banning energy exploration and oil drilling. So, I mean, he's trying to stymie President Trump's policy agenda as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's really Joe that's doing this or some activist little intern behind the scenes. I mean, it's anyone's guess, really. But, they told us that they elected Joe Biden, of course, to bring decency back to the White House, back to the land, really. Well, that fell apart almost immediately. But every time Joe gets in front of a camera, and they desperately want him to stay away from cameras, as is evidenced by the last 4 years, but he gets really testy, like an old person who missed their Jell-O time at the nursing home. And here's Joe Biden once again bringing decency back, reminding people that he's done so damn much. Let's take a listen.
The only thing, my being the oldest president, I know more world leaders than any one of you ever met in your whole life.
So he's getting feisty, he's getting angry, more and more angry. And, it's really interesting because on the one hand, I think Joe is just saying like, screw it on his way out, full send mode. And on the other hand, he's also very, very angry, as evidenced by every time he speaks to journalists, real contempt for journalists and reporters, which they said actually Donald Trump had, which was a complete lie. But what do you think we're going to see over the next couple of weeks from Joe Biden? He said he's going to give 2 major speeches on his way out. I'm wondering what we can expect from those.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I kind of like the unfiltered Joe Biden. Maybe if he had behaved that way more during the 4 years of his presidency, the American people would give him a higher approval rating. But this is kind of the Joe Biden that anybody who's covered politics in Washington got to know when he was a U.S. senator from Delaware. You'll remember that moment when he was vice president under Barack Obama using some profanity. So I can't say I'm particularly surprised about that latest speech. In terms of his upcoming remarks, I honestly don't know. I mean, Joe Biden can barely make it through a 5-minute press conference. I mean, he can't take questions from the journalists that are in the room. He gives a blanket statement and words are slurry. You can barely understand what he's trying to articulate. Oftentimes he's getting basic facts incorrect. And so to deliver 2 speeches, I guess if the teleprompter's working, I mean, he'll be able to get through it. But no, the American people are done with Joe Biden. They're ready for a change in leadership. Donald Trump has been effectively acting as the president since the November 5th election. And that's why world leaders are turning to Trump and already starting to figure out, what direction the American people this country is headed in the future. And I think that is so important. I mean, you just saw with Justin Trudeau deciding to resign as Canada's prime minister. I mean, that I think could be directly attributable to the pressure that Donald Trump has put on him.
I'm glad that you brought that up because with everything going on, in a normal day, like a prime minister resigning would be even bigger news. But because every day is such a major news day in this country, this has taken somewhat of a backseat. But very important to your point, because I think that Donald Trump probably had a hand in this, either, a little bit indirectly. I think Justin Trudeau did not want to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. I think that his little feelings were really hurt being called the governor and all of these things being said about Canada becoming the 51st state. But here is Justin Trudeau giving his remarks. Let's play a little clip of that for those that missed it today.
I'm a fighter. Every bone in my body has always told me to fight because I care deeply about Canadians. I care deeply about this country, and I will always be motivated by what is in the best interest of Canadians. I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the president of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
If he would have just hung around a little bit longer, he could have been the governor. But unfortunately, he's decided to bow out. Something, by the way, that Joe Biden probably should have done, not just from the race, but also from the presidency. But then we would have been left with Kamala. So all bad options there. But I really do believe that Donald Trump had a hand in that. And I think that Justin Trudeau did not want to go up against Donald Trump in negotiating. And I think that he made Justin Trudeau look very, very small, little Justin there. What do you think that the world should brace for, positively and maybe in some cases negatively, with Donald Trump becoming our 47th president. I think a lot of folks, including Zelensky, are really worried that their money might dry up. And I think now he's trying to Zelensky at least is trying to kiss Donald Trump's butt because he wants that check to keep flowing in. But what do you think that the world should be bracing for?
I think there are a few things. Number one, Donald Trump has been very clear when it comes to using tariffs to even the playing field, level the playing field, whatever you would want to say when it comes to the trade imbalance in our country. He feels, and this is, by the way, classic Trump, something that Trump believed long before he was even a politician. And so, I mean, we know that Donald Trump has a solid record on this. I think that world leaders should expect Donald Trump to use tariffs in a way that they have not seen before from an American president. I think he'll be even more emboldened in his second term than he was his first. I think when it comes to some of the foreign wars, Donald Trump has basically fed up with the record of Joe Biden on this front. I mean, whether it be Russia and Ukraine or the situation in the Middle East, he wants to bring an end to those conflicts. And I think he's put people in place and in positions where I hope we'll see things like what happened during his first term, the Abraham Accords, the historic agreement between Israel and some of its longtime rivals in that region. And so those are two areas where foreign leaders will need to adapt and adjust. You're not going to have a president like Joe Biden, who is very hands-off and really probably delegated so much to Jake Sullivan and other people in his national security team. Donald Trump is going to be calling the shots, and he's going to expect a return when he wants something done.
Question for you, and I just want to get a brief comment on this, but over the weekend or heading into the weekend, Donald Trump named a friend of mine, Morgan Ortagus, a friend of this show, a friend of Fox News, of course, named her in a role. I don't remember the deputy of this something State Department, right? So she's been in the State Department before. We know that she was involved in the Abraham Accords. I don't know if you saw his post about this, but it was sharp. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was essentially, I'm nominating Morgan Ortagus to this, but she fought me for 3 years. This probably isn't going to go well. I hope she learned her lesson. I don't really want her, but Republicans seem to want her, so we'll give it a go. What do you think about that? And I mean, that is kind of a real backhanded way to nominate someone for something. Were you surprised to see that? Because I certainly was.
It's the unpredictable nature of Donald Trump, Tommy, that's for sure. I mean, you have a situation where even those people who don't know the details, and they don't need to know the details, Donald Trump will make sure that you're on notice that he is the boss and he's going to expect high things from you. Morgan Ortagus will be in one of those high profile roles. I mean, she'll be involved in the Middle East peace process, and she's obviously a very capable person. But yes, I mean, it was unlike what you would normally get from a presidential announcement, and even some of Trump's presidential announcements. Let's face it, he's had quite a few in the last couple of months since winning re-election, and so that is a departure. But by and large, I think that what Donald Trump is doing with this second term is putting a greater focus on personnel and making sure that whoever is in the job that he picks them for is going to follow through on his agenda. I think he was frustrated during his first term that people like Rex Tillerson and Jim Mattis did not do that. They were maybe high-profile names who garnered a lot of support in the U.S. Senate. But then when it came to getting the job done and carrying out an American First agenda, they didn't deliver.
Yeah. He wants to make sure everybody knows who daddy is, I think. And that's why he sends out these messages and sends them out very publicly. And, it is unconventional, but maybe we need a little bit more unconventional attitude in this country. I think most of us would agree that that's in order. The last thing I want to talk to you about is kind of a departure from politics, somewhat, but it's a video that was circulating over the weekend. And it's a graphic video. I have to warn my audience that some people might be disturbed by this. But this happened in Beaumont, Texas. And again, this happens all across the country. You've got these people that are do this drag racing or just thuggery. These look like thugettes. But this woman, as you can see in this video, is speeding off. An officer is trying to stop her. He lands on the ground out cold. The poor man, I believe, is in stable condition, but serious condition. And this, to me, is just representative of something we talked about earlier, the Soros activist DAs, but also a culture of lawlessness that's been cultivated. Zero respect for authority, zero respect for law enforcement. You've got these people who want to get themselves a social media video to look cool on Instagram or TikTok. And, I wonder where the accountability is. And this looks like to be young people. How do you think we get our country back in order, not only from a political standpoint with what Donald Trump can do, but also just from a decency standpoint? Because these kind of videos are far too common and they circulate on social media and a lot of people applaud them. How do we get back and get back to Jesus?
Tommy, I think what you said there was spot on. And we do live in a culture of lawlessness right now. I think you can probably date this back to the period of COVID and what we talked about earlier with the riots that took place and the lack of accountability for many of the people who committed crimes. And people think that they can get away with anything and they can disrespect police. I'm glad to see that so many people have come out to support law enforcement. And it was really tragic to see that particular video and the officer get hurt there on camera, and our prayers do go out to him. I have long said that part of the problem here is that we have lost faith, and we need to return to the teachings of Jesus Christ and what he left us. Not only how to treat our neighbors, but also not to break the law and to respect people in authority. And so, how do we do it? I think it starts at a local level. It probably starts in the family. I mean, and that's ultimately how we're going to change hearts and minds in this country. But it means that individuals who commit crimes like this serve time and are punished, and they're not released. They're not granted clemency. And it was so disturbing to see the reaction, the social media reaction after the murder of the United Healthcare CEO, and how people viewed the suspect in that case, Luigi Mangione, as a hero. And I don't know what's wrong with individuals who would view him that way. But Tommy, we've got to change. Starting this year in January, it's a good time to start.
It's a great time to start. I think you got two big problems in the youth. And I would still count myself as a member of the youth, even though I'm 32. I would say part of it is like white, snobby, liberal, progressive, Ivy League kids who want to rebel against their parents and whose parents, by the way, are not doing a good job policing and disciplining their brat children. You've got part of that. They were the ones, by and large, praising the United Healthcare CEO assassination and all this and thinking that Luigi Mangione was so hot and all this. Gross. Our concept of masculinity is so skewed. And on the other hand, I think you've got a lot of people who do things for the cameras. They're young people that they want to look cool on social media. They circulate these videos on like the World Star and the hip hop and all this. And they think that this is what it means to be, cool or to be in the culture. And it's not. It's disgusting. We need mothers and fathers in the home. And if you're not ready to be a mother and a father, you probably shouldn't have kids. And that's just my PSA. But I really appreciate you joining me today on January 6th. I'm sure wherever you are, there will be people crying tears. About 4 years ago, some people have likened it to the Civil War in Pearl Harbor. I wouldn't go that far, but we will move on to January 7th and the sun will shine again. Thanks for joining me today and Happy New Year.
Thanks, Tommy. Happy New Year to you.
All right, folks, I have heard a lot of dumb crap come out of blue states, but this one is a real doozy. Get this. As of January 1st, New Jersey teachers will no longer be required to pass a basic literacy test. I kid you not. It's time for final thoughts. So we have a crisis in American education. Our students, on average, are failing. And if they're not failing, the standards have been lowered to fail-proof their performance. It's not totally their fault. Many things contributed to this, but here are a few right off the top of my head. 1, schools, administrators, districts, teachers, unions, and some activist educators themselves have decided their versions of social justice in education are more impactful lessons than reading, writing, and arithmetic. Then, to make matters worse, the COVID-era lockdowns, shutdowns, remote learning, months or even years, followed by forced masking of students, led to learning loss that will have generational negative impact. But instead of cleaning all this crap up and getting back to basics, New Jersey decided to say screw it and lower the standards, not just for students, but for teachers. Yeah, get this. Based on an act signed into law by Democrat Governor Phil Murphy, Act 1669 to be exact, quote, individuals seeking an instructional certificate will no longer need to pass the Praxis Core test, a basic skills test for reading, writing, and math that is administered by the state's Commissioner of Education. So what's the rationale behind this madness? Well, according to Democrat State Senator Jim Beach, who sponsored this stupid move, the state needs more teachers, and lowering the standards is apparently the best way to get them. Call me old school, but I'd say it's better to have fewer teachers of quality as opposed to more warm bodies cosplaying as teachers, but who didn't or unable to pass a basic literacy test. But that's just me. You'll be completely unsurprised to learn the Teachers Union, the New Jersey entity associated with the major National Education Association, was reportedly the driving force behind the move. Apparently, they believe the test to be an unnecessary barrier. Wowie. Folks, while researching this story, which I thought had to be a parody, I discovered that New York did the same thing in 2017 as a way to increase diversity within the state's teaching staff. California and Arizona have also made similar steps to lower the bar for teachers due to shortages created by the pandemic that they also created. Whether you have kids or not, this should rattle you. Not only have schools and districts downgraded educational standards for students, entire states have also lowered the bar for the educators themselves. The blind leading the blind. What an embarrassment. Those are my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in tomorrow live at 1 p.m. Eastern. Catch full episodes of the show on Fox Nation whenever you want. Also, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.